Hello and welcome to the Collapse Experiment. I am 45 years old and I avoid people. And here's why. Yeah, you've seen a lot of these videos on YouTube. But I think a lot of people are doing them just as, oh, this is a fad, so-and-so had so many views. Whereas, nah, I just genuinely avoid people. Most people, and what I say, including myself, most people just have their own genuine interest at heart. I used to be one of those guys that would try helping other people until the whole notion of helping someone else became, quite frankly, almost dangerous. Especially when it came to, possibly losing your job because somebody thought something was creepy. So I quite frankly don't even bother trying to help people anymore. The smaller the store for me, the better. I can't stand going into Meijer. I really don't like going into Walmart. Back in the day when malls were the big thing, I'm referring to like high school now. Aside from the orange chicken at Oriental Express, back when you could have racist names on stores. Aside from that, there really wasn't anything at the mall for me. Couldn't afford to buy anything there. When I went into Spencer's or Hot Topic, the only thing I ever could do was, hey, there's a clearance section. But the idea of large crowds, being surrounded by a bunch of people, not for me. As for making friends, I was told, was that like 2 years ago now? Because we had moved to northern Michigan in 2020 and I worked a lot. It's weird. You hear things like, you don't really spend as much time with me and the kids as you should. And then it turns into, you really need some time with friends. And I'm like, friends? What friends? And for a while, a former coworker, he had started a podcast. I was not keen on this idea because I had done podcasts before. Look in my previous videos. You'll find new podcast, new podcast, new podcast. I've done the podcast thing to death. It's not for me. It's just, there comes a time when you have to realize it's just not going to happen, okay? Plus the market is just so overly saturated to the point where, let's say you do have a semi-successful podcast where maybe 1,000 people are listening to your show. Are you going to get advertising? And what is the purpose of said podcast, right? Now, not to say there aren't some cool podcasts out there that are on the fringe of the podcast world. Like, unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but you can still find the shows. Program the Chill. That one was pretty awesome. Then there's several others, which I have a feeling that William Ramsey's Investigates, I think with him, a lot of it is like he does these shows, he does these interviews, you know, he collects information on topics that he's interested in. But at the same time, like, the dude writes books. He has other projects. He's done documentaries. So really, the podcast itself is like advertising that he controls for products that he benefits from, profits from. So this guy starts this podcast and he wants me to be one of the co-hosts on it. And from the beginning, I was like, dude, I will help you set up. I can show you the ropes. I can tell you how to start this, like, no money down, basically. I still had podcasting equipment from a previous show that I had done. And he's like, oh, you're gonna be one of the hosts. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to fucking do this. So we did this for about a year. I did. Actually, their show is still on. It's still going. But after about a year, I was like, every Sunday, for me, it was like a half-hour drive one way to get to where the studio was, which meant an hour of driving every Sunday. And then I usually had something in mind, or already had done the research on whatever it is that we're going to talk about. And these guys, even the guy running the show, would sit there and Wikipedia their topics before we could even start. And I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, get your shit together. What is happening here? Like, so I ended up leaving the show. And I knew with the guy who was doing the show that with his personality, he would just, because I had tried leaving before, and he was like, oh, no, you don't know how valuable. I'm like, I know how valuable I am because I come prepared. I already know the information. And on the upside, the upside of leaving was almost immediately afterwards, I had found a place. Now, it may sound like it's almost the same thing, right? This place, this game shop, if you want to call it that. Card games, video games, Magic the Gathering, Flesh and Blood, I believe, is the other one that they're really big on. But they had Pokemon on Sundays, and my daughter was really interested in playing Pokemon. Like, we had been playing it at home. We've been playing with like battle decks and stuff, but she could play with other kids. They had a kids league. And so that was on Sunday. So I started taking her to that. Half an hour one way driving. We're there for like an hour and a half. Shorter amount of time than the podcast, but here's the difference. I'm spending time with my daughter. And that was the big difference for me. Chaga, this black stuff here. So, well, there's like one guy in the group that I wouldn't mind hanging out with from time to time, but some of the others, I was just like, dude, if it wasn't for this thing, I would not even be here. And it's not even my show. And that's the other kicker. It's like, you start doing a podcast, you don't know, aside from the person who's running the account, who might be getting advertising, things of that nature. You don't know how much the show is making, which usually in the first 5 years is. But at some point in time, the other co-hosts are going to be like, oh, I'm working for free. What's going on here? This is bullshit. He's profiting off of what I say. So when it comes to this channel, for one, you won't see any podcasts in my future. I actually sold that equipment. I don't want anything to do with it. Just not my thing. And as for the channel, this channel in itself, you're probably not going to see anybody else on it. For one, I am not tech savvy. So when it comes to like people, this is how tech savvy I am. Skyping in, that's not even a thing anymore. What was the bullshit that they were using in 2020? I forget what it was called. Zoom meetings. Yeah, that's not happening. I'm not going to have any co-host. It's just going to be my thing. Because that's the other thing. Then there comes like competition or somebody feeling like, yeah, it's your channel, but I do all. And other reasons to avoid people. Well, being taken advantage of. It's not my thing. This morning, I'm driving on my way to work. I get towards the end of my street. There's an intersection. As I'm pulling up to it, I kept seeing these headlights. Then I noticed there's some flashing lights. And I'm like, what's going on up here? So I get closer. And then I realize it's a minivan that had driven off the road. And as I'm getting closer to this minivan, I'm like, okay, the guy in the driver's seat, he's moving around, he's fine. And then I see, as I get closer, like my car is getting closer to his van, and I'm like, oh, I should probably move. So I turn the steering wheel, car's not turning. Then I tap on the gas a little bit, tires are spinning, car's not moving any faster. Yeah, the whole intersection was a sheet of ice. So I didn't hit the van. I was able to get past it. I was able to eventually turn in the intersection. And then I had to use the gravel on the edge of the road to make my way probably like a good half mile before I was able to try cruising along on the road again. But I was still hitting patches of black ice in different spots. Why do I bring up that story? Well, my initial thought was, could I possibly help this guy get out of the snowbank that he is in? And a quick, like, half-second inventory in my head as to what exactly I had in the car. I'm like, no shovel, I don't have this, I don't have that. I can't do jack for this dude. The other thing was, what is it going to cost me? Am I going to get to work late? Am I going to lose money? Am I going to get my car stuck? Which seemed like that was going to be the situation, considering how my car was handling the intersection going at 15 miles per hour. There's a phrase when it comes to like EMTs and first responders is that you can't help anyone if you're dead. And this is referring to a lot of the eager people, firefighters, EMS. They get into that profession and they're eager to help. They want to be the hero in the situation. And so there's stories of so-and-so, like X amount of days on the job, They get out of the ambulance and like, oh, I gotta get over there and get pressure on that wound because they're bleeding to death. Next, they're hit by a car because they were not observing and protecting themselves from what was going on around them. I kind of feel like that's just life in general these days. You have to be careful about who you bring into your life. They say how your life goes depends on like the 5 closest people around you, which is true. I know that from my early 20s when I was hanging out with some goofballs that I think overall the purpose that they served was to show me like, this is not how I want to live my life. When one guy is handing over his paychecks to a dancer, another guy is just nonstop, endlessly depressed, can't get off his ass, is always working some crap job. His girlfriends are always the bottom of the barrel, if you will. Literally, like one had 2 kids and was still married. And he was with her for like, God, I want to say like a year or 2. But these guys, they had no ambition whatsoever. Like, they just really accepted their lot in life. They didn't want to go anywhere. They just kind of accepted the things as the way that they were, with no inkling to get out of what it is they were doing. And they used to give me shit for taking like college classes. But this was during a time when the schools they went to, which was like Loy Norix and Kalamazoo Central, they both went to Norix. But I heard the same thing at Central, which was if you did good, if you did your homework, if you were reading the material, the other kids in class would give you shit. Like, oh, y'all think you're smarter than us type bullshit. And that's the environment that these guys came from. I didn't. Like, I went to a Catholic prep school and I didn't do horribly bad. Like, I know some of the kids that were towards the bottom of the class, but I was like somewhere in the middle. I graduated with a 2.9. Just couldn't get to that 3-point. And then so even with me, like, I never lost my interest in things. Like when I get focused on something, I want to know all about it. Whereas other people are just like, why? Just watch TV. What is the point? You're still going to have some hourly shit job with shit benefits, and you're going to be divorced, and this is going to happen, and blah, blah, blah. If you surround yourself with crappy people, you're going to have crappy results. If you surround yourself with people who never have any money, you're never going to have any money. Bad habits are easier to pick up than the good ones that will get you from point A to point B. And bad habits are the things that will set you back quicker than anything else. If your friends are a bunch of heavy drinkers, Well, you're hanging out with them, so what are you doing? If your friends are in debt and that's considered normal, well, guess what? And from what I've seen, usually the people who are doing well are the ones that really just focus on their own things. Do they have close friends? Not really. They may have acquaintances, people that they bump into here and there. But this whole notion of like entertaining people and being friends with, oh, we've been friends for 10 years. Really? Neither one of you have changed? I think that used to be the case like 50 to 100 years ago. You could bump into somebody that you knew from the farm or grade school, and you'd probably be pretty much the same people. Let's face it. TV wasn't really a thing. You might have had radio. Radios were expensive back then. Reading was expensive. Books were expensive. That is how we ended up with the library. It was only rich people that could afford to buy books. And so rich people got together and said, hey, well, if we just pool our money and then we vote on what books go into the library so we all have access to them. And then Franklin was like, why don't we just do this for the general public? But I think things have changed, and I think people change a lot more than we acknowledge. And then there's the times where people just don't change at all. And it might be the fact that they haven't changed, but you have, for the better. You come to realize this when you run into them later on. There was a guy I used to hang out with in high school, and knew him for years. And then, well, things changed. And there were things that I wanted to do with my life. He was stuck where he was at by his own volition, right? This was his choosing. He had gotten married. His wife poked some holes in some things. They had a kid. They both worked at the same job I had in high school. He never left. And eventually he was there, God, I want to say he was there, almost 20 years. All of a sudden he started working at the hospital where I was at, and I was like, what the hell? But he was the exact same dude I knew in high school. And meanwhile, I had gone and done all these other things and moved on, and my interests have changed, and he was still stuck in 1996. So this is why I avoid people. It's one of the reasons I moved. I got tired of going to the local Meijer and running into like 3 or 4 people that I knew from previous jobs, from high school. People I just never really intended on like ever seeing again, but there's that awkward, like, you look at each other, you acknowledge that you know each other, one person has to say something, and then you're stuck there for 5-10 minutes going, yeah, I remember, Meanwhile, your 5-minute stop to get the one thing at Meijer has now turned into an hour-long ordeal. I'm making it a point to not really get to know anybody anymore. You get to a certain age, and the 40s are really just my field of blank is barren, okay? I have not fertilized. I have not plowed. No seeds were planted. I have 0 blanks to give. And when it comes to that, it's the same with just meeting new people, trying to make friends. And I've got stories about some of the friends that my wife was like, "Oh, you should do the podcast and hang out with them." And it's like, as time went on, I'm like, they're gonna get my ass arrested. That's what's gonna end up happening here. I don't need these kind of friends. So yeah.
Like and subscribe.
What was that?
Like and subscribe.
You heard the kid.